If you have a garden with more than one bed, you've probably thought that you need to rotate your crops. Most of us think that that's something we have to do every year, especially when we have a lot of beds. And if you had the opportunity to sit down with an expert, very knowledgeable gardener to have a discussion about crop rotation, would you do it? Well, I certainly would. Hi, I'm Gardener Scott, a master gardener who discusses everything gardening so that you can become a better gardener. Join me today for a conversation that I had with Tony O'Neill from the UK's Simplify Gardening channel, and we try to answer the question, is garden crop rotation needed? Hi, today to help me answer that question, I'm with Tony from Simplify Gardening. He's joining from the UK. I'm still in my Colorado home. Tony, how are you today?
I'm great, Scott. Thanks. How is it over in Colorado?
It's great. We've got a lot of smoke from the fires that you might have heard about. The weather's changing. It's cold. I understand you've got a lot of rain.
Yeah, we've got it coming down pretty heavy here at the moment, but it's good for the garden, so that's not too bad, you know.
So, Tony, the reason I'm asking this question is because I think a lot of what we do in our home gardens is based on how farmers, and especially industrial farmers, have been growing for hundreds of years. And while some of the practices might be suitable for home gardeners, I don't really think that crop rotation, which may be needed on large scale growing, is necessary in our home gardens. What do you think?
Yeah, so there's one thing that I've always found as well, you know, that we take what farming is doing and then we incorporate that into our gardens, and it's so crop rotation is one of those things. Out in the fields when they're growing all these monocrops, and we've dragged that down into our little backyards, if you like. And it's one of those things that I think is quite frustrating, especially if you're a new gardener. I'm noticing it all the time, especially as new gardeners come onto my channel.
Right.
They're telling me, you know, it's just so complicated. And
Oh,
so
sure.
are you hearing the same thing from your
Oh, yeah.
subscribers?
I found that over the years, there is no agreement when it comes to crop rotation. You have some authorities that say it's a 3-year crop rotation. And so in the first year, you're planting root crops. And then the second year in that bed, you're planting fruit crops. And then the third year in that bed, you're planting the leaf crops. And then you have someone else that says, well, in 1 year you're supposed to grow potatoes, and then the second year you're supposed to grow brassicas. And then you have a whole nother system that says it's a 7-year rotation, and you plant by family. So you've got legumes and brassicas all interspersed with it. And so it becomes so confusing when you try to figure out just which way you're supposed to follow, because there's so much conflicting information about what crop rotation in the home garden is really all about.
And it's like anything else, Scott, when you consider that for a new gardener's coming into this, their mind is blown. Well, I've got to move things around. I've got to do this. I've got to set up plans. All they wanted to do was come and grow some food to eat,
That's
you
right.
know, and they that was why I named my channel Simplify Gardening, because I wanted to bring it down and make it simpler for people to understand. And when you're starting to have to say, right, okay, this year now I need to build a list for all the stuff I want to grow.
Yep.
I have to think, right, okay, I need this many potatoes because this year I've only got a bed of this size, and next year I can grow double the carrots because they're in a big. I mean, that's just ridiculous. And this is why so many new gardeners really get frustrated. They pull their hair out and they
Oh,
end up
yeah.
quitting because they think this is just too hard. And I think as well, you know, a lot of gardeners, they tend to garden like a monocrop. Right, I'm growing tomatoes here this year, and after the tomatoes are done, that's it.
That's
You
right.
know, they cover it over, or or they just leave it. They dig it over and leave it bare, and you know that's that's what we need to get away from. Because if you do growing it like a monocrop, then that's when the issue happens, because you're not giving that time to
Yeah.
continue, the ground time to continue repairing itself and rebuilding those nutrients and rebuilding all the microbial life in the
Right.
soils. And
Well, and I think that's another reason why crop rotation really isn't suited for home gardens, because there's the assumption that we're growing nothing but tomatoes in a bed,
yeah,
and we're growing nothing but potatoes in a bed, and we're growing nothing but peppers in a bed. And so it becomes really easy to just move from one bed to another as part of a crop rotation plan. But I don't grow complete beds of carrots, and I don't grow complete beds of any single crop. And so
have you?
right there, there's no reason to crop rotate because it becomes even more confusing.
I find as well, going back down this sort of misconception about crop rotation, that they, when something is set in stone, like something like crop rotation, it's passed down from generation to generation, and people are too willing to follow it because it's one of the fundamentals that we have told, well, you must do it or you're going to end up losing all your crops or all of your tomatoes or whatever it is. And because of that, if you don't rotate, you're going to pick up all this disease and your plants are going to die.
Right.
In reality, do you find that that's the case? Because I don't.
Not at all. We've learned that it's the practice of gardening. It's how you garden. It's developing the whole biosystem of your garden. And that's how you attack pests. And that's how you attack diseases. And that's how you improve your soil. And so I think that's a key difference between us and a lot of beginning gardeners is they haven't learned that yet. And that's what I try to do with my channel. I know that's what you're doing with your channel, is to try to help those beginning gardeners understand some of these concepts so that they're not led astray by misinformation, that they can develop these healthy garden systems and everything will be in balance and work
Yeah.
out.
It's learning to read the garden, what's going on. And I think the problem with a lot of new gardeners and some older ones as well is that they'll go and put their plants out, they'll follow a crop rotation process, whether it's a 3, 4, 7, 10 year, whatever it is that they're doing, and they don't actually read what's happening with the plants. Or if a plant gets a pest issue, oh, it's because I didn't crop rotate, or it's because of this. And I know, like myself, you've grown lots of vegetables in the same location year after year.
Oh,
I've
sure.
grown tomatoes for 6 years in a row in my polytunnel. I've never once had blight or any other pest disease. It's about building that soil structure so that you don't need to crop rotate. But my point here, Scott, is we're now trying to explain to people, is it really necessary? And we're talking about the soil and everything else. But importantly as well, I think it's important to talk about growing in your soil constantly. What's your
Absolutely.
views on that?
Well, I grow tomatoes in the same bed every year. I've got a new house, and so I've created a whole new tomato bed that I'm planning on using again next year to grow tomatoes. And what was the first thing I did after I pulled all of the tomatoes that got zapped by a freeze recently? Well, I put in some green manure. I put in a cover crop. I've already started my winter rye seed in some of those beds that just a few weeks ago had plants in them. And I'm mulching. I actually use mulch and cover crops. I know there's a lot of people that say do one or the other, but I do both. I'll actually put in compost and mulch and seeds, and I grow my cover crops just like any other plant in my garden so that as we move into the winter, the ground is covered. Mother Nature does not have bare soil in a healthy ecosystem. It's covered by plants or plant debris like a mulch, and that's the way I like to garden. I don't like to fight Mother Nature. I like to follow Mother
Work with it.
Nature's guidance and try to achieve the same results.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. As a society, we have been used to using chemicals now because we've got into the habit of growing monocrops.
Yeah.
We've depleted those soils, the pest species have come in, and because we've depleted those soils, we only way we can get enough fertilizer back in those soils is chemically, because on large scales, like hundreds of acres, you just can't add enough organic matter to make a difference. And
Absolutely.
because of the way the gardening practices have been, it's been passed down, and we assume as small gardeners at home that that's what we have to do because that's what's been pushed down from our grandparents and our parents and everything else.
That's right. And by doing that, and we force ourselves to use those synthetic chemicals to revive the soil, but I'm not using synthetic chemicals. I'm using organic matter to replenish the soil. And I think that's a key component to this discussion is that if we're regularly amending our beds and revitalizing the soil just with organic matter, not only don't we need to use those synthetic chemicals, but we don't need to rotate our crops.
Yeah, I mean, we at home when you're gardening, we're totally different to the big farmers of this world. You know, when you're running hundreds of acres, why are we using same principles as them? We are in an ideal situation where we can feed our soil. Now,
Yep,
too many people think that they go out and they have the whole wrong idea about looking after their plants because they think they've got to feed their plants, they've got to fertilize their plants. Whereas in fact, that's not what they have to do. They
that's
have to
right.
feed their soil. And feeding
Exactly.
their soil is when they get great plants. And we need to make a mind shift for gardeners at home so that they realize that we are imperfectly placed to step away from those traditional methods because we aren't farmers. We haven't got hundreds and hundreds of acres. We are gardening in a small area, but we we are rotating our crops even when we're growing in the same place because of further crops that we will grow later
That's
on,
right.
successional
Yeah.
sowings and things like this.
Yeah, I practice succession planting, and I know you do. A lot of experienced gardeners learn that that's the way to get as long a growing season as possible. You grow those cool season plants in the spring, and then the warm season plants in the summer, and then cool season plants again. And just by practicing normal gardening succession planting, in essence, we're rotating our crops without even really thinking about it.
So my question here is then your crop rotation for like a farmer, yeah, we can understand why they do it. But in
Yep.
your garden, so we talk about a soil disease for argument's sake, powdery mildew. In your garden now, if you've got powdery mildew in one bed and I move them to another bed 15 feet away, okay, the likelihood is
You've
powdery
got
mildew
powdery
there.
mildew. Yeah.
So crop rotation in that respect isn't working anyway, is it? Because that's a soil-borne issue, and just moving your crops from one place to another isn't going to affect that so much.
This was the very first year that I grew in this garden. Now, I've been gardening for 30 years, but I recently moved, recently set up this garden. All of the beds are new, all of the soil is new. Everything about this garden is new, and I had powdery mildew on my squash this year.
Yeah.
And so there was no crop rotation to even think about. So that blew in on the wind or was in the soil that I used to fill the beds already. And
Yeah.
so crop rotation is not going to help in a situation like that because so much of these spores, so many of these diseases are all around us already. So, Tony, I think we are both in agreement that crop rotation in a home garden is not needed. But as we both understand gardening, there are situations when things we do every day change. So, how about crop rotation? Are there situations when crop rotation should be done?
Yeah, I think that to turn around and say you should never move your plants and should grow in the same place all the time is just really silly. And
Yeah,
as gardeners, we need to be responsible in what we're deciding to do in our gardens. But like I said, I don't think we need to go down the yearly crop rotation thing. But there are times that we do need to crop rotate. And they would be something like if we had a disease like onion white rot in, for argument's sake, or onion root rot, depending where you want to call it.
right.
And this is quite a bad disease that can stay in the ground for long, long periods of time. And the reason for that is a lot of people don't know how to deal with it. And again, that all boils back down to managing the soil in the ground.
Sure.
But in the early stages of that, then you need, while you're sort of eradicating this issue, you need to grow your onions elsewhere, or you're asking for trouble. But what I don't want people to get here is that we're saying don't crop rotate, and then they take that as gospel and they just stick
Yes.
their plants in the same place. You need to read the garden, and if you're seeing an issue and it's a pest or a disease that isn't going to be dealt with quickly, then it makes sense to move and grow them elsewhere so that you can still have that crop.
Yes.
But as a yearly thing, I don't think we need to do it.
Well, and I think there are other factors. And again, this is how we develop as gardeners and become better gardeners, is recognizing not just our soil and our plants, but our entire environment, to include the microclimates, because not every bed is suitable for every plant that we might want to grow.
Yeah, I agree.
And so it's one of those things that we look at a particular bed and realize that the plant that is growing in there is suffering. There's not enough light, or maybe there's too much light, or there's not enough air circulation, or it's next to a wall and it's too hot. I think that's a situation where we need to rotate out that plant. Not necessarily crop rotation, it's just
Yeah.
moving plants to a better location.
Yeah, I totally agree. And again, that just boils down to learning what's going on in your garden, paying attention. We really benefit by taking that step back, taking in that garden and thinking, right, okay,
Absolutely.
what's working well, what isn't, and why isn't it working well, or why is it working well? And things that are working well, guess what? We can leave them where they are.
Sure.
Whatever isn't working well, we need to look, why isn't it working well? Oh, it's because of the pH of this soil. We need to move it. Because yes, you can amend the soil, but until that happens, and that can take time, especially if you're growing in large beds. It's okay in
Oh,
a pot
sure.
or a container, but if you're growing in a large bed, then we may need to move it. But that's not crop rotation, because you don't intend on bringing that back on a like a 4-year cycle. You've
Exactly.
moved it for the benefit of the plant.
And that's a good point. We can move plants all around on a regular basis, and that's not crop rotation.
We have a fantastic opportunity with our gardens that farmers would wish they'd give their right arm to have, and people just don't realize it, Scott. And
That's right.
um, you know, we don't need to do the things they're doing just because that's what's been done in the past. We need to stand up and say, well, look, that's what happened then. We've evolved a little bit now. We know different now.
That's
And
right.
and this is where the education starts, where people need to learn this and try it for themselves and see those successes, and that they don't need to follow those rules.
Just be smart, be a smart gardener, as smart as you can be in your own backyard or in your own allotment, and you'll have great success. Tony, I really appreciate this opportunity. I enjoyed the discussion, and I know when we put our videos out, there's a lot more of this discussion that's not going to make it into the final video. So I'm
Yeah,
looking forward to seeing the video that you produce as much as I'm looking forward to seeing the video that I produce.
yeah, I think that'd be fantastic, because I don't think people realize just how much we've been talking here today about this subject. It's such a big subject, and it's great to see other people who are with the same views as I am.
Yeah.
And I'm finding more and more people coming around to this way of thinking as well.
This has been a great topic, a great discussion, and I'm looking forward to Tony's video. I hope you are too. So I encourage that you go to Tony's video. I'll put a link to it in the description and on the screen right now. Simplify Gardening. And while you're there, subscribe to that channel. And if you're thinking about it now, go ahead and subscribe to the Gardener Scott channel if you haven't already done so. I'm Gardener Scott. Enjoy gardening.